Near the end of Phase 2 of the Camp Ripley Sentinel Landscape Comprehensive Literature Review Project, I sat down to have a conversation with historical researcher Jeremy S. Jackson. In this video, Jackson talks about the methods he and fellow Nino Cultural Consultants team member Fred Sutherland used to gather data and stories about structure sites and features within the CRSL. He also shares specific highlights and discoveries made during this phase, all of which will be included in the final comprehensive report and interactive geodatabase being completed by the Nino Cultural Consultants team.
And here's the thing: is each one of the historic structures as well as the archaeological sites that we studied, each of them had a unique process to recover the information about the site. There's not a recipe to do this. Each of this required problem solving. There's a lot of times you can go to historical societies and each of them have their own collection that might tip you off or have information about a historical site or archaeological site. For example, we dove into schoolhouses very early in the project and realized there's untold number of schoolhouses in Cass, Crow Wing, Morrison, and Todd County that they may have been mapped years ago, but there isn't a master map of these places. And most of these buildings are long gone. So the schoolhouses became a big focus early on, where we spent probably 3 or 4 weeks mapping all the schoolhouses.
Jeremy's been working ahead of me in terms of trying to find good leads, and then I've been helping him verify and add them to the database.
So each push pin is one of our sites that we entered. It's kind of a jumbled mess when you look at it this way. But I think a vast majority of these, I'd say 3/4 are schoolhouses or county schoolhouses. And the way we identified locations is there is some old maps that have some of them on them, but then also there's 1939 aerial photography that exists. In Morrison County, it's 1940. There's old plat maps, and it shows some of these schoolhouses would move. So they might have picked them up and sledded them a mile away. The farmers did, it depends on where the kids were coming from, I suppose. So some of these buildings were transient themselves, and so there might be multiple foundations for the same building. The LiDAR became a big tool. We could use that to pinpoint where some of these places were, and you could see where the building was, where the privy pits were. So I would say mapping was a big part of the schoolhouse project. So then these structures or sites would be placed onto one of our spreadsheets and then mapped into this master map that Laura is creating based upon that data. Fred was mostly the data entry guy, so he'd enter in the coordinates of where they were located, the township, the section, etc. In some cases, we went further. We did some digital newspaper research. A lot of times we'd find pictures of these schoolhouses within the historical societies to have that documentation of what the structure looked like, even if it wasn't standing anymore. Doug had accumulated a vast collection of books, maps, and of course he wrote numerous reports, countless reports. He had a massive library. That collection, upon his death, Linda arranged for it to be donated to St. Cloud State University. And Rob Mann, who is the chair for the Department of Anthropology there, saw the value of this collection. If you want to learn everything there is to know about central Minnesota archaeology and history, it's in Doug Burke's collection. And so as part of this project, the requirement was that we would access that collection because it was well known how important it is to fill in the gaps. We did go and tap into the collection. There's probably things we still haven't tapped into. But I do think that from Doug's notes that we were able to find and identify all the historical sites and structures that he knew about, but there may be much, much more to tell about these things in his collection. Through my research, I was continually being introduced to historians and other researchers in the region. And so the individuals that we interviewed during the course of this project, many of them were known to the town hall and recommended to us. We did meet Horst Henneken. Horst Henneken is an author of a few Morrison County town and township books. Fred Sutherland, who's on the Camp Ripley Sentinel Landscape Project team, became familiar with a couple of his books while he was visiting some of the historical societies. And so we obtained copies of Horst's books, and in there was a couple, 3 ghost towns that were detailed in the book. And one of those was Dixville. And from the book, we were able to determine where that ghost town was located, and we arranged to talk to Horst at the town site, as well as where some of those buildings were relocated. There's very few people that know where the town is located today, and obviously Horst knows where it was at, but it truly is a cultivated field today, and so impossible to tell where it's located. There's very few clues.
My name is Horst Hanneken. We are standing at the site of a former Buckman Township town that existed from 1895 to 1913, the town of Dixville.
I met Ray through the Friends of Crow Wing, and the Friends of Crow Wing group is a collection of individuals that are very interested in the history of Crow Wing Village. And Crow Wing Village is another ghost town, probably the most important ghost town within the Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape. It was a fur trading post, initially established many decades before it actually became a town.
Crow Wing is one of the most historic and most important sites in the state of Minnesota, in my opinion. And the reason I want to say that is it goes all the way back to the French, and in particular Radisson and Groseilliers, when they were the coup de bois coming, from Montreal and Quebec.
Sylvan Town Hall put on a series of 6 presentations, historical presentations once a month back in 2019 called History in Your Backyard series. And Mike North, I think, provided 1 or 2 of those presentations.
My name is Mike North, and I live in Sylvan Township. I moved here in October of 1998, and just serendipitously, I happened to move in right next door to the Chippewa Agency site. And I did not know anything about it when I moved here, but I do love history, and I work for the Minnesota DNR.
And he has a real strong grasp of the history and archaeology of the region because of his association with the Minnesota DNR.
We know that the Hole in the Day was interested in joining the Dakota Nation in the uprising, and he sent for the Leech Lake Band to come down. And so a lot of people came down from Leech Lake. They followed the Leech Lake Road, and we have I've seen historical documents that say they camped out where the Otter Tail Road and the Leech Lake Road met, about 2 miles upstream from up from Crow Wing. And we have maps that put that spot there, and there's a nice little pond right there at that spot, so you can go out there and you can find that pond today, and you can know exactly, in theory, where they camped.
David MacArthur really has amazing ancestry or genealogy in his family. He's descended from some very important people, including Paul Beaulieu, which is Clem Beaulieu's brother. Paul Beaulieu led the van of Gull Lake Ojibwe or Chippewa to White Earth when they first were removed from the Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape to be taken to White Earth. But he's descended from many really important Ojibwe leaders as well.
At the treaty, one of the treaty sightings in approximately 1863, Paul Beaulieu was the interpreter for the American government, for the United States government. One of the signing chiefs was Wabajig. Wabajig was the father of that girl who, with Paul Beaulieu's son, made the connection of Emma Marie Beaulieu, who was my great-grandmother.
So Doug Burke met Cullen in school. They were the same age. They graduated the same year, and they became lifelong friends, basically, from elementary school until the day Doug died. And so Cullen was very interested in Doug's interest in local history and archaeology, and their close friendship. Doug invited Cullen to be president of all of Doug's important archaeological surveys throughout the state.
The Barclay Trading Post was actually only on that property for about, as I could recollect, somewhere around 5 years, and then the railroad decided to move or position the railroad tracks approximately a mile away from where the trading post was, and Barclay moved his post then up beside or the end of the property that the railroad would be taking. through. But the old post site is still on my property there.
Kellen is still a resource for me to tap into and ask questions about, what do you know about this site? Can you give me more details? What do you recall? We stopped and interviewed the landowner where the Barrows mine is located, just south of Brainerd, a few miles. The landowners were father and son. Well, actually, the father owned the property. It was Tom and Mike Mertens. And we were surprised at how much was still present in terms of ruins and the structures that were there at one time.
Jeremy Jackson and I were just talking about all of the heavy concrete and the bolts for machine mountings here. It, to me, reads like an ore crushing area.
We were able to interview them and actually educate them on what they had on their property a bit. And later on, I emailed them some maps, some photos, and they never seen that before, even understood that those things had been located there.
It's all concentrated iron, but they wouldn't have been doing any smelting here.
We went to the city of Brainerd, and we first interviewed Carl Faust.
And he said, let's take this picture that we just recently discovered from 1877. Until we found that, we didn't realize that any of the Leech Lake Ojibwe actually spent any time here or had an encampment. Of course, they came down the river to sell their deer saddles and blueberries, but we didn't realize that they actually stayed here.
We chatted to Carl a bit about his work on his research on the Mississippi River history through Brainerd. With Carl, I had located a site of an Indian encampment that was located on the west side of bank of the Mississippi below Riverside School, and we studied a photograph and determined and pinpointed where it was located. Carl is, as I said before, Brainerd's prime historian. He knows more about Brainerd history and maybe about Brainerd than anybody else living today. And we met with Mayor Dave Bedeau. He's really pushed for a change attitude towards historic preservation.
With Brainerd, we really have what I refer to as generations of history, and it's an area where you continually see the same names pop up again and again and again. And what that does is it creates a kind of a legacy, and it creates a sense of individuals that want to learn about their past, and their past is here. You know, their fathers, their grandfathers, their grandmothers are available. So when you get individuals like Carl Faust, who really is just a wealth of knowledge, and he can start relaying that information to people, what happens is it becomes this effect where people get super excited. And I think that's where we are right now, is that these buildings have been around for 100 years, but we're really starting to learn the history of what has happened in those 100 years, and that starts to touch in the human aspect of it, where people start to learn that their relatives and their heritage is tied up in that as well.
We interviewed Stephen Scheitberger.
I'm Father Steve Scheitberger, priest of the Episcopal Church, retired.
He'd written a book about an Ojibwe man who became a missionary.
And I've just finished writing a book about a priest who was here in the Gull Lake area. Enmagabo is his name. The name can translate in English, stands before his people.
He served at the St. Columba Mission site on the east shore of Gull Lake, which is within Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape, so that information is important to our research.
The mission was founded in 1852 by Enmagabo and James Lloyd Brick, and it was on Gull Lake. It was Hole in a Day's band, and they were invited by Hole in a Day to come to teach the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. And there was a mission, and there was a church building.
So this is the third ghost town we stopped at. The first one was Dixville. That was really a mercantile town down in Morrison County for the farmers. And then we stopped at Barrows. Barrows was a mining community. It only lasted about a year, and the population of Barrows has been declining ever since then. Gull River was a lumber town community that sprang into existence in 1880, founded by the Chase, Pillsbury, and Lumber Company. They had their headquarters here, and they started operating their sawmill in 1880. They started building it in 1879.
In 1892, they decided to move to Northeast Brainerd. They had just completed a dam in Brainerd in 1888, and it created the mill pond of Rice Lake in Northeast Brainerd. And they tapped into the potential to float the logs down the Mississippi instead of down the Gull River, as the stumpage around Gull Lake was dwindling, and they knew they needed to do something different to keep the sawmill operating. So they relocated the entire town to Northeast Brainerd, including the sawmill, the equipment, many of the houses, the office building, and some other structures, including the boarding house, were all moved to Brainerd and rebuilt board for board.
So really we're looking at a really wide diversity of ghost towns that are represented within the Camp Ripley Sentinel landscape. But in each of these communities, the fact remains that it's a series of individuals who come to a frontier landscape for a better life, engage in an activity, whether it's mercantile or industry, make a go of it for several years, and then sometimes for things outside their control, other times because of pure choice or chance, they move to other locations and new communities arise. All right, we're good.